Welcome back to another crochet tutorial with Cozy Rosie UK, and today I am sharing with you how to crochet Don't Be a Clock Watching square. Now this pattern creates a 12-inch square which is worked in the round and has two different points at where you can end this pattern. It is written for a 12-inch square, but of course, as you can see, you can create a 10-inch square very easily just by stopping a few rows short. In the same way, you can continue to make it larger as well. Now before we get started, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and of course the notification bell so that you never miss out on any of my crochet tutorials or patterns again. So the materials that we're going to be using for this crochet blanket square is about 150 meters, maybe 170 yards worth of Aran or worsted weight yarn, which is a size 4. I'm going to be using up some of my scrap yarn to create this little square, and I'm choosing to use some of my leftover Furls Wander acrylic yarn. You know how much I love this. I think it's a really great premium, shiny, beautiful acrylic. I do have to mention, however, some of this yarn was gifted, some of it was bought. It's not why I'm saying how much I love it. I wish I could get hold of it a lot easier. Unfortunately, the shipping to the UK is a little bit expensive, so I don't really get my hands on it very often. So I'm making the most of every bit of scrap I've got. As I've mentioned, this is a size 4 or a worsted weight yarn, and the recommended hook size is a 5mm hook, and that is the size that I'm going to be using today. A 5mm hook to go with this yarn. I'm making a multicoloured version in this video here. Regardless of whether you're making a solid colour or you're working in multiple colours, you need to fasten off at the end of round 6, and then we're going to rejoin in the corners that we make. When you're working in one colour, you'll always end in the corner, so you can follow along the pattern regardless of whether or not you're fastening off with a new colour. The way I've calculated it is I have A, B, C and D, and we end on row 15 with colour D, so I wanted to end with this darker colour. If you had 3, you're still going to end on colour C as well. Throwing in that extra colour really adds a little bit more depth to the colour changes. I am going to be changing in every round. You can obviously choose not to. You can create this in your own way. So as I said, you need about 150 meters, 170 yards of Aran or worsted weight yarn. Grab as many or as few colors as you want, and let's get started. Now I'm starting with color A, which is Mist, which is a beautiful silvery grey color from Furls Crochet, and I'm just going to pop my slip knot onto my hook. Now I never start my squares or my blanket squares with a magic circle because I am concerned they can come undone. So instead we are going to start with a chain of 4, 3 and 4. We are then going to slip stitch into the first chain that we made just by inserting our hook, yarning over, pull through and straight through the loop on our hook, and this creates a ring for us to work into. This top loop here, or this top hole, we need to ignore that one. We're going to work into that middle hole there, and all of our stitches in round 1 are going to be worked in there. I'm also going to make sure that I work over my tail as we complete round 1 so that it makes it easier for winding in, for weaving in. I'm going to start by making a chain of 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now this chain 5 counts as our US double crochet and 2 chains. We're then going to yarn over the hook and work an additional double crochet into the center of that ring. So we yarn over, insert into the middle, not that top hole, and we yarn over to bring that loop through. We yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and we then chain 2. We're going to do that 4 more times. So we yarn over the hook, insert into the middle. I'm working over my tail at the same time to work another double crochet, followed by a chain 2. For a third time, we yarn over to make a double crochet and then chain 2. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We need 2 more. So we work 1 more double crochet. We chain 2, and finally our 6th one, 1 double crochet and a chain 2. We now need to slip stitch into the third chain out of that chain 5 to join this round. So 1, 2, 3, I'm going to cover those 2 up, just pop my hook through that third chain and slip stitch to join, and then we're going to slip stitch into that chain 2 space. Now, because we're changing colour, I'm actually going to pull back that slip stitch and slip stitch with my new colour, which is going to be this one that I already had ready. It's like I knew what I was doing. So we insert into that chain 2 space. I'm going to bring my new colour over my hook with the tail at the back and pull through and through the loop on my hook. I can then pull on that working yarn just to tighten it. So at the end of round 1, we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 double crochets and 6 chain 2 spaces. Going into round 2, we start with a chain of 2. Now this chain 2 does not count as a stitch, and I'm going to work over my ends as we begin this round as well. I'm just going to hold them against the back of my project, and we're going to start by making a puff stitch into this chain 2 space. So we yarn over, insert, yarn over to bring a loop up, and we're going to do that 3 times in total. So that was number 1. So we yarn over, insert, yarn over, bring a loop up for a second time, yarn over, insert, yarn over, bring that loop up for a third time. Now you should have 7 loops on your hook. My yarn is a bit splitty, so we can't count them, but I assure you there are 7 loops on my hook. We're going to yarn over, I'm going to pull down so I can glide my hook. Ugh, maybe not. Let's try that again. So you have to almost over exaggerate your puff stitches. So yarn over, insert, 1, 2 and 3. Just gives you a little bit more space, and then we can yarn over and pull through. Am I going to be able to do this? There we are. We're then going to make a chain 1. Now we're going to work a second puff stitch into the same chain 2 space, followed by another chain 1. So we yarn over, insert, bring a loop up, 2 and 3. We then yarn over and pull through all 7 loops and chain 1. We're going to work a puff stitch, a chain 1, a puff stitch and another chain 1 into each of these chain 2 spaces around. So let's do the next space together. So we yarn over, insert, into that chain 2 space, yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull up. So we've got 3 yarn overs, yarn over, pull through all 7 loops without splitting your yarn. We all love puff stitches really, don't we? And then chain 1. We're going to work that another one into the same chain 2 space. 1, 2 and 3. Yarn over, pull through and chain 1. So continue to repeat that all the way around, working a puff stitch, chain 1 and another puff stitch into each chain space around. I lost count there. Is that 3 or 4? 3. And I'll meet you at the end of round 2. So at the end of round 2, you should have 12 puff stitches and 12 chain 1 spaces, which are in between each of these puff stitches. We're going to join to our puff stitch rather than into our chain 2. And then we're going to slip stitch with our new colour once again. So I'm changing colours, just going to grab that and bring that in. So I'm just in that first chain 1 space, bringing my new colour over, pull through and straight through the loop on my hook, pull on the working yarn, and we are ready for the next round. For round 3, we start by making a chain of 3, and this chain 3 counts as a double crochet. Once again, I'm going to work over my ends, keeping everything nice and tight, and we're working into that chain 1 space between those puff stitches. We're going to work a further 2 double crochets into that chain 1 space. So that's 1 and 2. That's nicely pulled tight. And we are then going to make a chain 1, and we're going to work 3 double crochets, or our granny stitch, depending on what you like to call it. So that's 2 and 3, followed by a chain 1. We're going to repeat this all the way around, working 3 double crochets followed by a chain 1 into each of these chain 1 spaces around, back to the beginning of our round. So continue to repeat that, making sure you do those chain 1s in between, and then working 3 double crochets into the next chain 1 space, or the chain 2 spaces. No, they're the chain 1 spaces. Oh, it's hard to keep track. And that chain 1 is incredibly important after your 3 double crochets. So continue to repeat that all the way around, and I'll meet you at the end of round 3. So I'm just working my final 3 double crochets into the chain 1 space, the final chain 1 space. So working 3 double crochets into that final chain 1 space. We chain 1. Just going to insert my hook into the top of that chain 3, ready to slip stitch with my next colour. I can tighten with my previous working yarn, and I'm just going to do a little chain 1 just to secure that for a moment so we can check our stitch counts. So at the end of round 3 you should have 12 3 double crochet clusters, or granny stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. In between each of these 3 double crochets you should also have a chain 1 space. So for round 4 I've already done my chain 1, and that's as big as a chain as we need to make. I'm going to grab my ends so we can work over those, and we're going to be making 1 US half double crochet into each stitch and chain 1 space around. So we're going to yarn over the hook, have a look at what we've got. So we need to work into the same stitch where we slip stitched. So I've just inserted my hook to work my first half double crochet, and then we need to work into the top of this next stitch. So I'm yarning over, and it just gets a little bit lost, so it's just carefully working into the top of that next stitch as well. And we're working into each stitch and chain 1 space around. So I've done 1, 2, 3, number 4, we just work directly into that chain 1 space. So we're just going to repeat this all the way around, and at the end of round 4 your stitch count should be 48 stitches. So we're working into the top of each stitch and each chain 1 space around. So at the end of round 4 you should have 48 half double crochets, and I'm just going to slip stitch into the top of the first half double crochet that I made in the same colour, because for round 5 we're going to be working into the 3rd loops of our half double crochets. Now this yarn is really good to show you how easy it is to locate, but I do appreciate that it's not the same with every single yarn. So if you imagine your stitch is the very top 2 loops here, so you've got the front loop, the back loop, and just at the back of that there is a 3rd loop, and we're going to be working our next round into that 3rd loop. Finding the 3rd loop of your first stitch is possibly the trickiest thing. On this one it's just here. So if you just move your stitch out of the way, it's just that one there. So let me fasten off these other colours, and I'm going to get ready with colour A to join. So I'm going to move the stitch out of the way, and I want to insert my hook into that 3rd loop just there. Sorry to put my finger over that while I did it. And this is where I'm going to join my next colour. So again, I'm just placing it over my hook, pulling it through that 3rd loop and the loop on my hook. What this does, by changing colour in the 3rd loop, it makes this row look a lot more complete. You can be really fancy and do an invisible join, which I probably should be showing you. So from here, we're going to begin our row of working into our third loops. We start with a chain of 1, and we need to work back into that same third loop. So I'm going to put my hook back through, pick up my ends of course, and work over them. And we're just making 1 US single crochet into the same as our chain 1. Then we need to find our next third loop. We can't hold our work as normal. Almost have to tilt it towards you and look for that third loop. So here is we've done our first one. So there's the front loop, the back loop. If we just push that out of our way, there our third loop just kind of pops up at the back. Pop that onto your hook. I'm going to place my ends over again to weave those in. And we're working a single crochet into that one. Going to do the same again. There's our stitch. Push my stitch down with my hook, and there's my third loop, and work. I want to work over my ends. Work another one. So we now have 1, 2, 3 single crochets, and we're going to increase into the next third loop. So we find the third loop. So there's our front loop, back loop. Move those ends out of the way. There's our third loop. It almost looks like it's on a bit of a diagonal coming towards you. And we're working 2 single crochets into this one. So that's 1 and straight back in for number 2. Now by working into the third loop, it pushes the remainder of your stitch towards you, and it gives a really nice kind of highlight feature of the beauty of our crochet stitches. For the remainder of this row, we're going to continue to work into those third loops, working 1 single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. That's number 3. And we then increase into the next, working 2 single crochets into the next stitch. I'm just going to repeat that all the way around. You'll end your row working 2 single crochets into that last stitch around. That's number 3, and then we increase. So continue to repeat that around, and I will meet you back for round 6. So at the end of round 5, you should have 60 single crochets, and we're going to slip stitch into the first single crochet that we made. I'm just going to insert my hook. I'm not yarning over in my current colour. I'm going to grab my next colour and join with my new colour, and we're going into another puff stitch row. We're going to start with a chain of 2. And we're going to work into the same stitch we've slip stitched into. So this can be a little bit tight and tricky. So we're going to yarn over the hook and work out exactly where we're putting our hook, which is where that, you can't barely see the colour change, but it is there, where we've just slip stitched. And we're yarning over, bringing a loop up, make that nice and loose. Just as we did before, we're doing 3 yarn overs. So that's 2. And number 3, yarn over, pull through all 7 loops and chain 1. We're then going to skip the next stitch, working another puff stitch into the next. That's 1, 2 and 3. We're going to repeat this by skipping the next and working 1 puff stitch and a chain 1 until we have a total of 7 puff stitches. So this is number 3. We skip 1, 1, 3. So continue to repeat that till you have your first 7 puff stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Make sure you've done that final chain 1, and we're going to work the first corner of our square. You might be wondering, this can't be a square, it's a circle. Let's turn it into a square in this round. So we're going to not skip the next stitch, we're actually going to work our first corner into that stitch. Make sure you've done your chain 1, then into the next stitch we're going to work a puff stitch, 2, 3. This time we're making a chain of 2, and we're going to work a second puff stitch into the same stitch. Followed by a chain 1. And this is going to create our corners. Now we're going to repeat this all the way around back to this last stitch here. We're going to work 7 puff stitch with a chain 1 in between. We don't skip the next stitch, and then we work our corner, which is a puff stitch, chain 2, puff stitch, chain 1. I'm just going to repeat this all the way around back to that. We'll just have 1 stitch remaining once we've repeated it around. So continue to repeat that, working, we skip 1, puff stitch, chain 1 7 times, followed by a puff stitch, chain 2, puff stitch, chain 1 in the next, and then we skip the next. I'll meet you at the end of round 6. So at the end of round 6, you should have a total of 36 puff stitches, 32 chain 1 spaces, and 4 chain 2 spaces where you've placed your 2 lots of puffs. We're going to join to the top of the first puff stitch and slip stitch, and we are going to make a little chain 1 because we're going to fasten off after this round. We'll fasten off both those colours and just pull that through because we are going to be joining into our corners or our chain 2 spaces. You can join in any of your corners, and if you know me well, I'm just going to tie on my new colour because I hate any risk of anything coming undone. So I'm just going to loop it through, pull my yarn through and make a knot. And that's into any one of your chain 2 spaces. From here, we're going to insert our hook and bring it through. We're going to start by making a chain of 4. Now this chain 4 counts as a treble crochet. That's a UK double treble. So quite a tall stitch. And we're going to make a further treble crochet into the same chain 2 space. So we wrap the yarn around the hook twice before we insert it into the same corner space. Yarn over, bring a loop up. It looks like you've got 4 loops on your hook. We yarn over to pull through the first 2. Should have 3 left. Yarn over, pull through 2, all of it, and then we yarn over to pull through the last 2. We then make our chain of 2 to maintain our corner, and we're working a further 2 treble crochets into that same chain 2 space. So we wrap the yarn around the hook twice before we insert, yarn over, bring up that 4th loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. We're going to make another one. So we wrap the yarn around the hook twice before we insert back again into that same chain 2 space, yarn over to bring up that 4th loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And this is going to be our corner. So each time we're in these chain 2 spaces, we're going to be working those treble crochets. We're then going to work into the top of our puff stitch, working a US double crochet, so the same as a UK treble. So we yarn over, insert into the top of our puff stitch and work 1 double crochet into each of the next 3. So that's 1, then we work into the chain 1 space with another double crochet, and then our 3rd double crochet goes into the top of our puff stitch. So that's 3. We're then going to work 1 half double crochet into each of the next 3. So we yarn over, insert into the next chain 1 space, yarn over, pull through all 3, yarn over to work into the top of your puff stitch for number 2, yarn over, insert into the next chain 1 space for number 3. We're then going to work 1 single crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. So the first one goes into the top of our puff for number 1. Number 2 goes into our chain 1 space. Number 3 is back into the puff. Number 4 goes into our chain 1 space, and number 5 goes back into our puff stitch. So you can see we're actually squaring or flattening off this round from our corner. So the stitches look the same, they just get smaller towards the middle. So we need to come back up in our height to go back out to the corner. So we're going to work 1 half double crochet into each of the next 3. So the first one goes into our chain 1 space, yarn over for our second into the top of the puff stitch, and yarn over for the third into that chain 1 space. We're then going to work 1 US double crochet into each of the next 3. So we yarn over for the first one to go into our puff stitch. The second goes into that chain 1 space, and the third goes into that first puff stitch from our previous corner, and then we are back to our chain 2 space for our corner. Look how much straighter that row looks. So our corner is the same as before, so we're working a US treble crochet, a UK double treble. We wrap the yarn around the hook twice before we insert. Yarn over, pull through 2, 3 times. That's 1, 2 and 3. Wrap the yarn around the hook twice, reinsert for a second treble crochet, and then yarn over, pull through 3 times. We chain 2 to maintain that corner shape before we work a further 2 treble crochets into the same corner space. And that brings us ready to work the same pattern along this edge again. So we're going to repeat what we did each time around each edge of our square. You can of course use the timestamps from the beginning of round 7 to complete this. I'll tell you briefly. We're going to work 1 double crochet into each of the next 3. So 1, 2 and 3. We then do 3 half double crochets, 1, 2 and 3. We do 5 single crochets, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. 3 half doubles, 1, 2 and 3, followed by 3 double crochet, 1, 2 and 3, and we're back to our next chain 2 space. So continue to repeat that around until you come all the way back to your beginning of your round, and that is where I'm going to meet you. Just completed my final repeat to square off this square, and all we have to do is to slip stitch to the top of our chain 4. We are then going to work across the top of the next treble and slip stitch into the corner before we fasten off, ready to change colour. At the end of round 7 you'll have 20 single crochets, 24 half doubles, 24 double crochets, 16 trebles and 4 chain 2 spaces. We're going to change to our next colour, and you can join in any chain 2 space. Once again, I'm simply just going to tie on my new colour because I am the lazy girl when it comes to weaving. Going to yarn over to pull through, and then we're ready to start round 8. We start with a chain of 3. That does of course count as a double crochet. We're going to make a further 2 double crochets into that same chain 2 space. That was number 2. We're going to chain 2 and then work another granny stitch into the same chain 2 space. So that's a further 3 double crochets. That's 1, 2 and 3. We then make a chain of 1. We're going to skip this first stitch. Now sometimes this first stitch can get hidden underneath what you've just worked in the corner, if you imagine. So if you can see the post of the stitch, it's actually there, but we're skipping that one anyway. And in that next stitch, we're going to work a double crochet, followed by a chain 1. And we're going to do that for a total of 4 times. So that was 1. So we skip 1, and then into the next one, we work a double crochet and a chain 1. So that's number 2. Skip 1, double crochet into the next for a 3rd time, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet into the next, followed by that chain 1. We're then going to skip the next 2 stitches, ready to work into the stitch on top of your puff with a granny stitch. So working 3 double crochets into the next. That's 2 and 3. So you should be looking a little bit something like that. We chain 1. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches. We're then going to work 1 double crochet, a chain 1 and skip 1 4 times. So double crochet, chain 1, skip 1. That was the first time. Double crochet, chain 1, skip 1 for the second. This is my 3rd. Skip 1. You might have to go underneath your slip stitch if, like me, you've worked to a different corner. So double crochet, chain 1. We skip the next. So we skip that next one. That brings us back to our corner, and we're just going to repeat this all the way around. So we're working a granny stitch, so that's 3 double crochets into that chain 2 space. We chain 2, we work a further granny stitch or 3 double crochets into that same chain 2 space, and then we chain 1. And we're just going to repeat what we've done all the way across. So we skip that first stitch, which isn't really visible, and we're working our double crochet, chain 1. We then skip 1, double crochet into the next, and chain 1. So repeat that 4 times before you work your granny stitch into the middle, just as we did on this area here, repeating that all the way around. You can always skip back to the start of round 8 and follow along with the timestamp there, so I can meet you for round 9. I will see you shortly. Just worked my final double crochet in my chain 1. Just going to slip stitch to the top of that chain 3, and then I'm going to slip stitch across to my corner, and I can fasten off. So at the end of round 8, is that all we're on? Wow. So at the end of round 8, you should have 12 granny stitches, so 1 on each side and 2 in each corner. You should have 32 double crochets and 40 chain 1 spaces. I have to imagine I've already blocked this for it to see its true beauty, but I hope you're agreeing that it is absolutely stunning. So I'm going to join with my colour 1. I can get it away from all the other yarns. There we go. And as always, I am just tying it off. I am just tying it in to any chain 2 corner space. And we are going to be working a chain 1 to start. We're going to work in this corner 1 half double crochet, a chain 2 and a second half double crochet. We're then going to work 1 half double crochet into each chain and into each stitch and chain across, and this is where it's really important that you hit or you get into that first stitch that can sometimes hide underneath. So if you just remember that you've got 3 stitches here to work before you go into your chain 1 space, so it's just hiding ever so slightly. So that's 1, 2 and 3, and then we're working into that chain 1 space. So working into each chain and each stitch across. Obviously I don't work into the chains personally, I just work into the chain 1 spaces, but you may have your own preference. Just want to get to that granny stitch with you. So we're only working 1 into this chain 1 space and then 1 into each stitch. Because even though we've skipped more stitches underneath, it's the stitches and the chains we're working into on this round. I love it when it all straightens up, it looks beautiful, doesn't it? So continue to work across to the next corner, working 1 half double crochet into each stitch and chain across. When you come to your corner that you've already slip stitched across, just go underneath your slip stitch and your original stitch will just be underneath it. So there's the slip stitch, just push through and your original stitch will be there. And that brings me back to my corner where I fastened off. So in the corner we're working 1 half double crochet, a chain 2 and a second half double crochet. And we're just going to repeat working 1 half double crochet into each stitch and chain 1 space across so that we look like that on each round, and I will meet you at the end of round 9. Do take care over those little pesky corner stitches, make sure you don't miss that first one. I'll see you in a few moments once you've completed working 1 half double crochet into each stitch, and then in the corners you're working a half double crochet, chain 2, half double crochet. Once you're back to your first corner, we are slip stitching to the top of that first half double crochet that we made and then into that first chain 2 space. We can then fasten off, ready to add our next colour into the corner. At the end of round 9, you should have a total of 116 half double crochets and 4 chain 2 spaces for your corners. So for round 10, I'm joining my colour B and just tying that on as always. Once you have your colour joined, we're going to start with a chain of 1 and we're working into the corner, working 1 single crochet, a chain 2 and a second single crochet into that corner space. Much like we did before, we're going to be working into the 3rd loop of our stitches. Need to make sure we find that first one after the corner, which is, oops, move that end out of the way. We've worked into this one. It's this one here we need. So we're just moving the stitch, the front loop, back loop. There's the 3rd loop. Move that stitch out of the way to insert. And we're going to work 1 single crochet into each 3rd loop around, all the way across to the next corner, and I will meet you there. So we're making sure that we can see our beautiful stitches from our previous round by working into that 3rd loop again. And then into the corner, we're going to work 1 single crochet, chain 2, and a further single crochet. We're going to repeat this all the way around, working into each 3rd loop across with 1 single crochet, and then into each corner we're working 1 single crochet, chain 2, 1 single crochet. Continue around and I'll meet you for round 10. So at the end of round 10, we are slip stitching to the first single crochet that we made and slip stitching into the corner. And then slip stitching, oh goodness, I was putting my hook there. Slip stitch it into that chain 2 space. I'm going to fasten off. You should have a stitch count of 124 single crochets around your apparent square. And this, so that you're aware, this completes that middle section of our square. So this is the kind of alternative pattern within a pattern. If you wanted a smaller blanket square, this would be kind of ideal. And add on or do something different with it, make loads of them, why not? So we're going into round 11 I'm just going to join in my chain 2 corner space. I find the end, there we go. And we're going to start by making a chain of 2. And we're going to be working in the corner here. That chain 2 does not count as a stitch. We are going to make our puff stitch. So we yarn over, insert, bring our loop up, yarn over, reinsert for a second time, yarn over, bring a loop up for a third time. We then yarn over and pull through all 7 loops, hopefully, there we go, and chain 2. We're going to make a second puff stitch into the same corner chain 2 space. So we're yarning over and pull through 3 times. That's 1, 2, and 3. Hope I made that loose enough to pull through. No, I didn't. All 7, there we are, and we chain 1. So that's going to be our corner. We're then going to skip the next 2 stitches. So we need to skip this first one, which our puff stitch might go over, and then we're going to skip 2 altogether. So skip 1, skip 2, and we're working into this next one here. You see how that one disappears? So it's just worth just pulling it out of the way, checking where your stitch is. So there's 1, 2, we're going into this one here, and we're working our puff stitch again. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Pull through and chain 1. We're going to repeat this all the way across, skipping the next, puff stitch, chain 1 in the next, and I will meet you all the way across over here, ready to work our next corner. So we skip 1, puff stitch, and chain 1. I will see you shortly. Just working my final chain 1, and we have 1 stitch left to skip before we go into our next chain 2 corner space. So we're working a puff stitch, a chain 2, and a further puff stitch into that chain 2 space, and chain 1. Remember, after the corner we skip 2, ready to repeat the same pattern of working a puff stitch, chain 1, skip 1, all the way across to the next corner. So continue across all your sides, remembering to skip 2 after the corner, and I will see you at the end of round 11. So at the end of round 11 you should have 64 puff stitches, and you're also going to have 60 chain 1 spaces and 4 chain 2 spaces. We're joining into the top of our puff stitches. If I can find mine, there we are. And of course I'm just going to slip stitch into that chain 2 space, ready to fasten off. Ooh. And we can join our next colour for round 12. Once you have your next colour attached, we are going to start with a chain of 3. This chain 3 counts as a double crochet. We're going to work a second double crochet followed by a chain of 2 and a further 2 double crochets into that same chain 2 corner space. We're then going to work into the chain 1 space. So we skip over the puff stitch, working into the chain 1 space. We're working a granny stitch, so 3 double crochets and 3. We then work 1 double crochet into the next chain 1 space. We're going to repeat this across to our corner, working a granny stitch into the next chain 1 space, followed by a double crochet into the next. So continue to repeat that across, and I'll meet you at your next corner. So you should end with a granny stitch into the chain 1 space, before your chain 2 corner space. Into that corner space we are going to work 2 double crochets, a chain 2 followed by a further 2 double crochets into the same chain 2 corner space. We're then going to rotate and work that all the way across again, working a granny stitch into that first chain 1 space. So 3 double crochets into the first, followed by 1 double crochet into the next, and we repeat that all the way across, ending with our 3 double crochet granny stitch into the chain 1 space before our next corner. In those corners we are of course working 2 double crochets, a chain 2 and a further 2 double crochets. Continue to repeat that all the way across and I will meet you at the end of round 12. So once we've reached our way back to our first corner, we're going to slip stitch into the top of that chain 3. And across the top of the next stitch into our chain 2 space, ready to fasten off and change colour for round 13. I'm losing track of which colour's which now. I've only got a few more rounds to go. Just going to fasten on my colour for round 13. And bring that through. We're going to begin with a chain of 3, which counts as a double crochet. We're going to work a further double crochet into our corner and then chain 2. Going to work a further 2 double crochets into our corner space and then chain 1. We are then going to skip the next stitch, working 1 double crochet into the next and a chain 1. We then skip the next stitch, ready to work a double crochet into the next again and chain 1 and skip the next. We're working this all the way across, working a double crochet, chain 1 and skipping the next all the way across to our next corner. So continue to repeat that and I'll meet you for our next corner. Once we've worked all the way across, we should have 1 stitch remaining before our chain 2 space, and we're going to work 2 double crochets, a chain 2 and a further 2 double crochets into that chain 2 space, chain 1. So we're going to repeat this again all the way across to our next corner, working 1 double crochet, chain 1, skip the next. So we skip this first stitch before beginning into the second, chain 1, skip the next, and we repeat that all the way across to the corner. In our corners we're working 2 double crochets, chain 2 and another 2 double crochets, chain 1, repeat that all the way across and I will meet you at the end of round 13. So once you come back round to that final corner, just need to skip that last stitch, slip stitch into the top of your chain 3, of course slip stitch across the next stitch and into that chain 2 space, and then we just have 2 rounds remaining. So I'm going to change colour. What am I on to next? This light one. Just going to tie that on, ready for round 14. And in round 14 we're going to start with a chain of 1. We're going to work 2 half double crochets into the corner space, a chain 2 and a further 2 half double crochets and 2. We are then going to work 1 half double crochet into each stitch and chain 1 space across. Remember this little corner one is going to be pesky and hide for us, so make sure you're working 1 and 2 before you work into that first chain 1 space, and then just continue to work into each stitch and chain 1 space across to your next corner, and I'll meet you over here. Just working into my last double crochet from the previous round before our chain 2 corner space. In the corner we are working 2 half double crochets, a chain 2 and a further 2 half double crochets. I'm going to repeat this around, working into each stitch and chain 1 space around, and I will meet you back at the end of round 14 for our final round. So at the end of round 14 you should have a total of 172 half double crochets, and just slip stitching across to my corner space, ready to add on my final colour. So if you wanted to continue to add additional rounds for this square, you can repeat rounds 10 to 14 and it will continue to grow by this section here, and it's marked by this half double crochet row. Once you've reached the total size that you want to create this square in, you would then work, instead of working round 10, when you get to the end of round 14, as we've just done, you would work round 15. So we start with our chain of 1, and we're just simply going to work 2 single crochets into that chain 2 space. We make a chain 1 and we then work a further 2 single crochets into the same chain 2 corner space. That one has disappeared. Let's find that. So we're just working one. Oh, where's my tail gone? Come back. Let's work over that as we go. Let's save ourselves one little bit of weaving. So we're going to work 1 single crochet into each stitch around, which is the same as row 10, which is the same as round 10, except we're not working into the 3rd loop this time, which will allow us to join this square to other squares. You will just continue to work 1 single crochet into each stitch across to the next corner, and our corner is very simple. We are working 2 single crochets, a chain 1 and 2 single crochets. You can opt for a chain 2 if you need that additional space in your corner, and that will complete your square. Thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. I know this is not the easiest square in the world to make, and unfortunately it will require some blocking to make sure that these edges stay straight, but I think it is absolutely beautiful. In my mind, I need to design a couple more squares and add them all together so that we can create an afghan using this square. So once you've completed round 15, all that's left to do is, unfortunately, deal with all the ends. Do make sure that you do a very good weave around your middle with your first tail. And this one has been lightly blocked already, so you can see the difference. Oh my goodness, you really can see the difference between the blocked and the unblocked. This one is a lot straighter from corner to corner compared to the wobbliness of this one. So do take time just to give it a light steam. Just wave your iron over it with a steam function on and gently position it so that it's nice and straight. Thank you as always for joining me. I will see you in the next video.